we'll just get right down to it, I think. And I'm going to put to you some questions to ponder and to contemplate. We'll use a bit of poetry, and I'll refer quite a bit to my book, The Spirit of Leadership. And maybe just a bit about myself. I was at the University of Canterbury for 30 years. I've been consulting in organisations since 1979, and did a lot of work. I started off as an industrial engineer, which was very much the wrong set for me, and moved into a lot of work around change and strategy and facilitating strategic plans after the Labor government in the 80s. Then I realised that everybody had the plan but nobody did anything, so I got into change. And then I got into change and realised that still nobody did anything, or the change was in the wrong direction. And then I got into leadership and did a lot of workshops on organisational leadership. And then I noticed that not much changed out of organisational leadership either. And then I became very interested in personal leadership and in the power of the underlying journey, the personal journey of leadership that underpins and is absolutely essential to the organisational and social journey of leadership. So very counter kind of intuitive for me. My doctorate was a factor replicator model of the tasks and skills of leadership, and it's a long way from where I'm at now. We started our MBA class last night on personal leadership. A bunch of engineers in there. We were meditating within the first half an hour, talking about mindfulness practice, and that's where we're at. There's a huge need, in Viktor Frankl's terms, to push the space between stimulus and response. And what happens to us is that we become so overstimulated that our responses roll out on automatic pilot. We go into automatic. There's a fella called TED Talk by Killingworth, I think the guy is. Looks like about 47% of the time we're simply not there. We are thinking about the future or anxiety about the past, but we're not there. We're not present. And so we become kind of overdriven, overstimulated, and in that space, the tendency is to lose ourselves. And so I think I want to talk about finding ourselves and how do we find the life that's ours to find? How do we stay with ourselves in these incredibly busy jobs and this world? What did Arthur C. Clarke say? Fully 98% of all human potential is utterly wasted. We function most of our lives as automatic machines, and we glimpse the higher resources of our potentiality maybe once or twice in a lifetime. What a sad way to live, and I'm sure it's not like that for all of us. Maybe it's just Arthur C. Clarke, but let's have a look. So we've had a quick preamble around life, business, and it's not just business organisations, it's kind of life. We do life much of the time on a comparative basis, so that we're vastly more affluent than we were in the late 1940s, for example, but the rate of clinical depression is up times 10 since 1947. There's just a lot of issues with the way we're kind of living, not just working, and the working approach kind of bleeds into life. Liz, my wife, and I were away for a year travelling, and we travelled all through Southeast Asia. We had months in Nepal, in the high mountains it was just absolutely fantastic. And I remember being on the beach in Thailand. We're making all sorts of plans about a different sort of life, a quieter, more simple life. So a week before we got home, Liz's mother got very sick, and then our daughter had a baby with us, moved in with her husband, and then our other son and daughter-in-law moved in, and then our other daughter came back, and pretty quickly, it's same old, same old. It doesn't take long to kind of lose it. So, with that preamble, let's have a look at Joseph Campbell. People say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life, and I think that's true, but I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think that what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on the purely physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. That's what it's all finally about. So let me give you a poem and a question. The poem, if I can remember it, is Rilke. And the poem begins, first verse. Sometimes a man or a woman stands up in the middle of their supper and walks outdoors. Sometimes a man or a woman stands up in the middle of their supper and walks outdoors and keeps on walking because of a church somewhere far out in the east. Sometimes a man or a woman stands up in the middle of their supper, walks outdoors and keeps on walking because of a church somewhere far out in the east. And their children say blessings on their head as if they were dead. Another man remains sitting inside his own house, dies there inside the dishes and the glasses, so that his children have to go far out into the world to find the church which he forgot. Question number one, it's a sort of double question. How's your vitality? And have you still got a church somewhere far out in the east? Now, I'm not suggesting you desert your children or run off with a teenager or behave badly on a commune in South California or any of that. But have you got a church somewhere far out in the east? Have you got a sense of invitation that's taking you forward? Are you still activated? Campbell says elsewhere that if you're on your way, life will open up all along the way. Have you got some type of invitational image or vision of your life and your work which is inviting you forward into your life, that's motivating and animating you? Or have you gone onto automatic pilot, just treading water, going through the motions? How's your vitality? How's your images of your own future possible life? Is that an okay question? Have a ponder and have a chat as much as you're comfortable about that. So let's just get a kind of starting place for how we're going here. We've got a number of questions to consider, so we'll make that our first and just keep the process moving. Can I hear from a couple of folks? What sort of stuff comes up for you in response to that kind of a question? What's been the conversation at your tables?
In our group, for some of us, the church far away isn't necessarily static and fixed over time, and it's a direction, but it's not necessarily absolute.
Yeah, and it does move around, and there is a bit of a problem with Rilke's far away. It'd be nice to have a church that's here. Yeah, so it's a bit of a moving feast. Yeah, great, thank you. Any more thoughts?
I quite like the idea of being at home, having supper and staying there, because my boys been at the church far away.
Yeah,
You know?
nice. Yeah. So sometimes a woman stands up in the middle of the church service and walks outdoors and keeps on walking. Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah.
We talked about the church symbolising our values, actually,
Yeah.
and our being, our way of being,
Yeah.
and that when you be that way, and when you really strongly identify with your values and sit down and take time to figure out what they are, then the doors and things just open as you go, as long as you're concentrating on the values, even through restructures, through raising children, through whatever it is.
Yeah. I think that's the critical point, because it's almost like there's some sort of guiding mechanism in us, and if we're there, and there can be a range of churches, but if there's that kind of core sense of alignment, it's going to be okay. And it's when we get off that we lose that vitality, we lose that rapture of being alive. So, yeah, please.
So in our group, there's some people who are working with, in their work, paperwork that's aligned with their, what did you call it? Invitational image.
Yeah.
And some people who aren't.
Yeah.
So that was a nice contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were the ones who were finding it a bit more enjoyable?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great to find that place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask another question. We'll come back to the work thing more broadly. And I'm thinking of Bilbo Baggins, as I'm sure we all are. Yeah. And so Bilbo said to somebody, was it Frodo? You never know what happens when you put your foot out the door where the adventure will take you. And so I think I'd like you to think about that. What would be an easy, positive foot out the door in the direction of a more aligned life for you? So I'm not saying at the moment you change your work. We'll come on to that. But so sometimes this sort of work can be a bit grandiose. We've got Rilke and we're charging off to churches in the east and deserting our children. But what's with you right now? If you actually took a breath and really had a think and a ponder and a reflection and asked yourself the question, what's the most positive thing I could do almost immediately or in the next few days that would take me in the direction of a more aligned life, a life which I felt was truer to me? What's before me? And it can be just very little things. But can you get it? Just have a wee think, and there'll be something I think for all of us. What is it that I might do, pretty well immediately, that might begin to shift me in the direction of a more energised and more aligned life? Can you ponder that for a bit, and put aside the biggies? So maybe you need a new job or a new whatever, but what's right in front of you that you might do differently? Self-nurture, a conversation, whatever. Please, just have a ponder about that in a chat. So, we're talking about small steps in the right direction. So small steps in the right direction, small, easy to do things, particularly in the domain of self-compassion, looking after ourselves, kind of getting our energy back or sustaining our energy. So what sort of ideas, and it'd be good to hear again from a few folks about the sort of things that came up for you when you thought about, first steps maybe.
Okay, well, I'll start. I think we were on the right track. We had building a shed.
Yeah.
We had following a nutritional program. We had reading more books and doing more sort of mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah, so building a shed.
So they're all things you can do.
They're all great. Yeah. Did you all hear them? Yeah. Do you want to give us that list again? It was a good list. So building a shed.
Yeah, that was me.
That was it. Great.
Building a shed.
Nutrition.
Yeah. Plan. With me, it was getting back into reading again.
Yeah.
Reading more
Yeah.
books. And mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah, so just simple practices that can be really, absolutely,
Yes.
and can be huge points of leadership leverage, paradoxically. Yeah, thank you. A few more of these sort of items? Yeah, please.
We heard a little bit off topic, but I think it's really valuable. And we ended up talking about the connections we have with people. So suggestions like actually in the evening turning off the TV and actually really talking to people in
Yeah.
the family.
Yeah.
And like not using your cell phone as much and actually connecting with people properly.
Yeah.
Rather than like just through social media and stuff.
Yep.
It's good for both you and
Yeah.
people around you.
Yeah, turning off your TV, genuine connection, genuine social interaction, and what's called presence. There's quite a big literature on charisma. Weber used to say it was about having this amazing vision and about being graced by God. So we might be able to do that by the end of this program, but right now we're just kind of starting. But the new definitions of charisma are about presence, just being fully, completely present in the moment with somebody. And also being present with ourselves when we're working. There's reading a book by, what's her name? I forget. But she talks about the challenge of multitasking. We're often doing several things all at the same time, and we actually need to arrive in the task, in the moment, being fully present. And then paradoxically, we need times of goofing off and doing nothing. So we get the creative surge that comes from the focus. That's a separate topic, but just relationships. You know, everybody's on their computers, in their rooms, separated. Yeah, so it's a brilliant one. Thank you. Couple more? Yep.
I'm actually following on from that. I don't know if using iPhone, but the really small computers that have do not disturb function.
Yes.
We were talking about how our technology controls us in the way that it's always demanding our attention.
Yeah.
When you have an email, a text, or all of this stuff, and I found that it was a lot of anxiety when I was working on this, so I was constantly being called and texted, and it was because it came from my back pocket. I didn't have any excuses to not immediately answer, and learning to put my phone on do not disturb
Yeah.
is on most of the time,
Yeah.
because that I control when I read my text, when I get, I mean, it makes it difficult to call you all the time, but you can do little things that, and like when you're with somebody, you can put it on do not disturb instead of just on silent, because you know even if it's on silent, it'll vibrate or something
Yes.
like that, and
Yeah.
you're still aware, or the screen will light up, and so you're always being distracted from
Yeah.
that kind of personal connection. Whereas if you can put it on do not disturb, your phone is basically on flight mode, but it's still receiving things.
Yeah.
It just makes a huge difference.
Oh, that's a great tip. How do you find this do not disturb? Yeah. Yeah.
It's a little moon on it, and literally, I think there is one for Samsung as well. But
Yeah.
it's more accessible.
Yeah, so thumb up and little moon.
Yeah, it's a little moon thing, and it is, you can actually time it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Such a good suggestion. So,
Yeah, and just related to that, on Android devices, you can set it up so that when you put your screen face down, it doesn't disturb you.
yeah.
So you can be sitting in a meeting and your phone rings, you literally just flip it over and it's on silent.
Yeah. For you Apple users, for the Apple users amongst us, I'm sure the iPhone 7 will rectify this difference. So thank you, Android person. Yeah. Any more? Relinquishing control. Yes. Yeah. 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 And maybe just letting go a little bit. And yeah. That's right. Yeah. Thank you. I think that speaks for itself.
We talked as well about how we often know how to look after ourselves, but we don't do it.
Yeah.
And having get to the point of making it come to life.
Yeah.
That's probably a really big challenge.
Yes, it is. And that's why I think we just start easily with the low fruit that we can find quite quickly, that doesn't feel like a burden. It's not some sort of, extraordinarily demanding exercise regime at 4 a.m, that we do begin. Yeah, we just begin with whatever's front and centre for us, I think.
Yeah, somebody in our group said, in an ideal world, I'll do this. And I was like, well, why don't you just do that?
Yeah.
Because we make excuses
Yeah.
and prioritise little things. Why don't we live in our ideal world?
Yeah. And it's never going to be ideal. It's like leadership. There's never time for it. We're always overwhelmed with management and administration. But so we start where we can with just something small, in the face of whatever challenges we've got.
I also think we create an environment where we are time poor, and we use that as an excuse. I can't do this because I'm time poor. I haven't got enough time. We've all got the same amount of time. It's just what we do with it that makes the difference.
Yeah.
And I've just, like this last year, a single parent, teenage son with a disability, and I go ice skating on Tuesday morning, and I work everything else around it. Doesn't go except for today. I don't want to be here till 11, but and that's just away from cell phones, whole different group of people, coffee, cake, conversation with we're all a bit strange because last gate. It just I need something to each have to go to, it's all real starting to sort of read my magazine for an hour, or half an hour, whatever, uninterrupted, well, that's not going to happen. At home, you almost need to go off to the library for it, somewhere, make some way of getting that time.
Yeah, and you start to schedule it. You put it in your diary, and there it is. So I've got appointments at the gym that I'm doing much better on. You prioritise it the way you would a work meeting or whatever that you normally wouldn't think of not showing up for.
And then you don't feel guilty when you do it.
No, because it's right there.
Yeah.
And you've anticipated, and somebody emails, can we have a meeting? You say, oh, well, sorry, I can't do it at whatever time, but I can do it at this time. And you start to
I guess we're not indispensable, that's the other thing.
No.
We think that we have to, if we're not being that, we can hold worlds to fall apart because we're the most important person there.
Yeah.
Whereas actually we're not. A, we're not. B, if we were, then that would give other people a chance to step up and maybe do what we would have taken over.
Yeah, maybe a little less control, a little more opportunity for others. Okay. Yep.
Another quick one is also forgiveness, so that when you do have a practice and you don't do it one day because you are busy, that you just automatically forgive yourself for not doing it.
Yeah.
So that it's just
Yeah. Coupled with that, I think we all need, we may get to it in this process, we all need an ongoing strategy of self-compassion. And particularly in the way that we talk to ourselves. Now, there's a couple of things that you always have time to do. You have time to talk to yourself, and on average we're breathing most of the time. And so they are things, even in our time-poor environment, we can become mindful of how we're talking to ourselves, and we can be kind in the face of stuff-ups, for example, or in the face of a lapse. So just watching our self-talk is fundamental. And we can breathe. And often we can alter the pattern of our breathing, and you can actually restructure your emotional life by shifting your breath. It's quite difficult to do it the other way round, but just conscious, intentional breathing, slowing down, taking a breath, watching the hyperventilation and the fast-paced breathing, and just taking a breath. If you supplement that with 5 to 10 minutes of meditative practice every day, that's really profound. But in the meantime, we're perfectly at liberty to breathe, and we're perfectly at liberty to alter the way we talk to ourselves. So a lot of the things we've been talking about have been a physical form of self-compassion, which is absolutely fundamental. And then the second part of that is just the self-talk that we take through life. Most of us have given ourselves hell for far too long. How would it be if we just made a decision not to do that? We've all got weaknesses. How would it be if we spoke to ourselves as kindly as a friend would, speaking to us about whatever situation we're beating ourselves up for? So, self-compassion is really important. Well, I just want to switch direction, and how's the heat? Are you coping? It's pretty warm, isn't it? Yeah. Let's make the shift to work, and I've got a few questions for you about work, and then we'll come back to us and work. One of the ways, and we're going to talk about it personally, but also let's start organisationally for the minute. One of the ways of attending to the malaise of organisational life is to refocus on the meaning of the work that our organisation does. What happens is that the meaning gets lost. Sometimes in organisations, in big corporates, human resources take over the place. And there's kind of endless amounts of compliance and planning and so on. And sometimes too, the strategy and the rules of the strategy kind of overwhelm the spirit and the deeper purpose of the organisation. And that's not good. So I've got a couple of questions for you around your organisation and the whole notion of passion and purpose. So in an organisation, when there is a deep sense of the difference we're making in the community, and we can associate into that, we can experience it, we can feel it, we are part of the contribution. And then you couple that with what Jane was talking about, people being aligned in themselves, both in their strengths and in what they're passionate about. You bring that together and you get an organisation that has kind of a vocational calling. It's an organisation that's doing work that's right for the people in it and right for the world at exactly the same time. It's a very powerful place to be. And then in place of endless strategies and intense statements and detailed plans, which are all okay, but for many of you, if you're getting government funding, you're going to be complied up the Nile. And most of that stuff is a nonsense. There's this need to fill in forms, and so there has to be some accountability. But what happens is that the accountability and the compliance begins to be the organisation. And it's fine, we have to manage that, and that's an interface that just has to be dealt with. But when the compliance outpaces the purpose of the organisation and the spirit, we've got a problem. And your task as leaders is to always make sure that the spirit is front and centre. Sure, you do what has to be done, and it's not really generally worth putting much energy into resisting that. You do it well, and you build up the trust that you need. But always, it's the spirit and the purpose of your organisation. What is the difference that we're making in the community? Why do we exist? Who are our clients and customers? What is the difference we're trying to make in their lives? And can we have obvious examples of the difference that we're making all the time that are able to inspire and support and sustain us in the really demanding and often not particularly well-paid work that we're all doing. So I guess my question for you is, how's the purpose? How's the sense of calling in your organisation and the powerful advantages? Workers with a calling orientation, this is Kim Cameron. Look, there's so much research on this. Quick corporate aside, I worked with a corporate years ago, big New Zealand firm. They brought in the usual team of tough-minded agents of change, all singing, all dancing, very male, very strategic. And they managed to drop the share price of that organisation from about $2 to nearly 22 cents. Such was the breadth of their intervention. And they were very capable men, well-meaning, good people, but full of themselves. But super expensive. Consultants. I was working with a mate of mine. He was on 5,000 Australian a day consulting into this organisation. This was 15 years ago. So when they'd just about killed the organisation and the board got rid of the senior team, I was invited to go and talk to some people about what went wrong. And I talked to a guy, big, huge, tall rugby guy. He was a rugby player, and he'd taken a swing at the chief executive at one of the leaving pay. He got drunk and tried to assault the chief executive. And so sometimes I'm quite in favour of this kind of direct, let's get it out there, instead of better than the sort of political stuff that often simmers away in organisations. So I said, what went wrong? And he said, look, we'd all been here a long time and we needed a bit of a strategic shake-up. It's true. So that these people had some gifts they could bring. But he said, and this from this guy, they didn't understand the spirit of our organisation. They just didn't understand the spirit of what it's all about. And that's where they lost it. So my question to you, thinking about your organisations, how's the spirit and how's the sense of pervasive purpose and contribution? Now, you've got to do the other stuff. I'm not going to get into that, but is the purpose, the why, front and centre? And does it enliven everybody who is associated with you, with the people you work with your organisation? How are you doing on that? And just front and centre, keeping the spirit of the organisation and its contribution alive. Please, so have a chat about that. So, thus far, we've covered a couple of themes. We've talked about the importance of sustaining ourselves, initially in small ways, and how important it is that we keep our vitality so that we can bring that to our life and work experience. And then we're talking really implicitly here about sustaining the vitality of our organisations. Now, on average, we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of resource, but we do have meaning. And we do have quite direct, small-scale connection with our communities, and that's a real gift. And so we really want to honour and foster and sustain that. So I hope your discussions have been helpful just in thinking about that, because that's your strength. And so how do we sustain the sense of contribution, the sense of purpose, and the sense of meaning that's associated with that, without it being driven out by exhaustion, by compliance, by paperwork. That's, I think, possibly the real leadership work of your sort of organising. But I want to go to a third part now, which is the issue, coming back to yourself, which is the issue of your own relating into the work that you're doing, and sustaining that same sense of alignment and meaning and vitality. And I want to suggest that you can do it in two ways. You can do it by recrafting your work so that more of your passion, more of your strengths are met in the work experience, and so that the sense of meaningful contribution is sustained and maintained over time. And so a lot of work can be recrafted, and it's amazing. The literature suggests that even work that we might see as quite ordinary can be recrafted into a calling if people are able to reconnect with their own sense of where their passion, where their strengths fit with this work, and the difference that it's making in the world. And just as Jane said this morning, it's about work that's good for us and good for the world at the same time. So there's a whole kind of recrafting dynamic. But sometimes too, the recrafting is not enough. Sometimes we have to leave, we have to do something else. And generally the soul leaves the organisation 2 or 3 years before we do. And so we need to know, where we're at. Because perpetual failure to respond to the needs of our own heart life will have us ending up like a ghost in our own life, and we don't want to be that person. So let's have a look at some of the ways that we can kind of consider our place in the world, our work, and how it's to be done. And let me say that this sense of calling, this combination of passion and purpose, it's very beneficial for the organisation. It's really beneficial for us. So I'm drawing now from a book I wrote a wee while ago that's been referred to, The Spirit of Leadership. And these are some of the comments from people that were talking about their work. I think it's Fiona Farrell is the first one, who's a writer and been doing very well, I think, recently. And talking about how, when I said, "You still love the writing?" and she just responded, just like that, "Absolutely. Absolutely and completely. It's still a passion. I just love it." A therapist friend of mine who I interviewed, "It feels amazing, an absolute joy. It's fun, it's rewarding, it's just wonderful. I love it, and that's how I know I'm doing the right thing." Mike Lillian, the basket maker, is down in Oamaru, and he's been willow basket making, I'll tell you his story presently, but for a long time. It's a sense of juiciness. In every way I feel complete, and actually in that basket, he pointed to a basket, I've reached the core of what I was destined to be, you see. Oh yeah, it's a wee miracle, all right. Rodney Cook, the Academy Movie Theatre? Anybody go to this? Yeah, the art. Well, Rodney died a little while ago of cancer, I believe. But I remember going to see him. It was on a Sunday afternoon. I turned up for my interview. He'd obviously forgotten me. You know how people look at you and there's just no recognition. I didn't care. I wanted his interview anyway. And so I sat down, but he just warmed up immediately. He was advising me on projectors, and he talked about his customers, and he said, "Oh, I get a lot of elderly people, often older women, coming in groups watching highly erotic Italian movies." And he said, "They'll come out, hoo, and he just sort of, and he's got these seats that he created for them. He wants everybody to be comfortable, to have an experience." It was just a wonderful life for him that was giving to him and giving to them simultaneously. It's very special. A total life. It's enjoyment, total enjoyment. That's what. Tony Mallard has an organic farm on Marshlands Road. They've sort of retired now, but I love the work. I love the machinery. I still get excited after close to 30 years. We've been blessed all right, he said. Margaret Jeffries is going to be speaking to us soon. Margaret's comment was, "It's a lovely, quiet contentment and satisfaction. My life's work is unfolding all the time, and I want to be open to the next step." So that sense of unfolding, I'm going to come back to you in a moment or two, Margaret, if it's not too embarrassing to talk about that. Sally Hope, an artist friend of mine, she talked about being a single mum, having to make a living, It's like you've got to do your compliance, you know, for the people that you've got to, so stuff you've got to do. And sometimes she painted by photo, you know, because she had to do stuff to make a living. But then she said she'd get somebody in front of her, and sometimes quite highly placed people, politicians and judges and so on. And she said sometimes you'd capture the light coming out of their faces. And I said, Sally, what's it like to capture light coming out of the face of the people that you're painting? And she said, I don't know. And this went on, and then she said, it's awe. It's awe. How would it be to paint love? How would it be to paint light? And she cried for 5 minutes. Just now, it's a high bar, I know. But are we experiencing Margaret's sense of quiet contentment, which I trust remains with us? Are we experiencing that sense of awe? Does the work seem a little bit blessed for us? Is there a sense of homecoming in which my own deep gladness and the world's hunger have been met simultaneously? Have a wee ponder where you're at with your work, and then we'll talk about navigating our way, you know, into the sort of work. We often talk about the meaning of my life and my passion and my purpose. And Viktor Frankl comments on that, and he said, it's not about the meaning that you want for your life, it's about what life wants from you. And that's a very, very different warm-up, a very different perspective. Peter Senge, one of the great systems thinking and leadership gurus based at MIT in the States, says that great leadership begins as we respond to the call to serve life. So that's very different. It's not a matter of us imposing our will and our preference on life. It's a matter of listening very deeply. And the listening, Margaret refers to this again in the book. You need to go where the energy is and to be open to the next step. There's a basic common vision, and it feels as though it's already in place and that it's there waiting for us to desire it enough to pull it into being. And all it requires is to get in touch with your passion and put a stake in the ground. I love that we're creating the future as we're stepping forward. See, the whole problem with corporate strategy is it's about a bunch of people, often men, getting together in an overheated room in Queenstown and imposing their will on the future. That's very different from associating with the future that wants to emerge. And our lives are not about the imposition of our will on life. It's about a deep sense of listening. And the listening occurs in two ways. So let's just talk about that. First off, we have to start close in. And it's something about images or intimations or kind of yearnings that come up in us. Let me tell some stories about this. Yeah, there's Hugh. Some of you know Hugh Wilson? Yeah. Well, Hugh Wilson was designing landscape stuff, I guess, when he was 8 or 9 years old at school. It was just present in him. And that's called an image. It's a kind of image of your own future that just kind of rests quietly at the core of our identity. Michelle, who I interviewed in Cambodia last year, she's a musician. She said, I have sung from the earliest time that I can remember. I've always sung. It's always been part of me. Neil Fraser is a sports car manufacturer in Auckland. He's since sold the business with a view to sailing around the world. I think it's his latest thing. And he talked about when he was 8 years old, the family had a concrete mixer. And he would strip the engine of the concrete mixer down. And for those of you that know engines, you port the ports and you plane the head and you play with the expansion chamber. And he said, we had one of the highest powered concrete mixers in Auckland. And his dad allowed him to do this because this is what he did, you see. This is who I am. This is who I am. That sense of stepping in to a kind of core identity. Sarah Crane, some of you may know. She works as a psychotherapist. She said when she was a girl, she was raised in Northern Ireland as a Protestant girl in a Catholic area. She said it was tough. She would sit on the edge of her bed and do little passion plays. She'd be the helper of Jesus or Ruth to Naomi. Later on, she brought animals home to be patched up. Then she taught English to gypsies. She had this kind of sense of somehow helping, creating, that was embodied in her, that was present in her. So you want to find your life. You already know it. It's not out there. It's present with us. Now, it may not be this narrow thing, but there'll be a broad path, and that's okay. That may hold many careers, but we want to be in that space. What does Mary Oliver say? You do not have to be good. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. You do not have to be good. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees through the desert, forgot that bit, for 100 miles repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. So that's phase one. We return to what we love. And we don't do it with a battery of cognitive arrangements. We use some of that. Things like StrengthsFinder can be tremendously helpful, Myers-Briggs. But then there's a final piece. That's a kind of homecoming, a kind of association into who we really are. And so if you're finding that your work is not as enjoyable and energising as it might have been or could be, you need to get back to yourself and trust yourself and see if there's any difference between what you love and what you're experiencing. Not at an ego level, but at a much deeper level. And you want to follow that sense. So that's the first piece. I'll keep talking for a bit and I'll give us some questions closer to the finish. So phase one is kind of getting back to that kind of original close-in sense of an image. Again, if I can speak about Margaret's very briefly. In fact, Margaret, I might quote you. I've always had this realisation, something about the spirit is the major thing that pulls everything together. I've been like that right from a little kid. I've always been moving in that direction. See, that's a profound creative image, something that pulls us into our own future. When we're associated with that, when we come back to that sense of knowing, now for some it might be quite narrowly defined, for others it might be quite broad, but it's there, and the work is to get back to that. And sometimes the way to get back to that is to build the garden shed. Paradoxically, we start to warm up to ourselves, and then with that sense of knowing, it can take us to the next phase, the next step in our understanding. Well, having done that, we need to get ourselves aligned with what life might have for us. So there's a place where you follow the image, you follow the pattern or the information, and that's kind of about what we're passionate about, what we'd love to do. But then you think, well, where on earth am I going to do that? You know, this thing seems so odd, so egocentric, so eccentric, so different. How am I going to do that? And so then we start to get very agitated, and we plan, and then often we'll sell it out because we can't see any money in it, and so on. The work then is one of attention. David White talks about the need to pay a scintillating attention to life and its invitations, just as Margaret described it, to the future that wants to emerge, to the next step in my life. So just a couple of stories around that. Mike William said he was raised as a Catholic boy. He knew he had to have a vocation, didn't have a clue what it would be, went off to vet school, hated it, did various things, ended up as a postie, and loved that actually, but he just knew that there was more for him. He had to do something with his life. And he said, so tell your students this, if they're feeling a bit existentially lost, tell them to follow the road signs. He said, I didn't know what I wanted to do and I was pretty anxious about it, but he said, I knew I wanted to sweat, I knew I wanted to work with my hands, I wanted to be self-employed, and I wanted to live in the country. So that's what he had as his data set. And so he said, I moved to a little farm cottage just out of Oxford. I started to run every day so I could sweat, and I started to look for work I could do with my hands and be self-employed in. And he said, here's what happened to me. I went to the Canterbury Public Library, and he said, you're not going to believe this, but I went in and I said to myself, I'm going to look through this big book of English craft work, and when I get to a type of craft work that moves me, I'm going to know that's it. So he said, I turned this big book and it was a double-page spread of cattle eating out of a willow basket. And he said, well, bugger me. That's it. And he went straight home. He started making baskets out of blackberry stuff, which he found uncomfortable. But up the road was the Cuss Community Centre. And there were people there, some men who trained him in that. And he's been making willow baskets from that day till this. Yeah, just kind of continuous. Neil Fraser said he wanted to make cars, but nobody was going to take that seriously, so he went off and got a job as a kind of engineer and so on, did various things. Had a little company that made trailers and scrummage machines. And he said, but the passion for cars had never gone away. He said, I was down at the Taupo racing track, and he said, I looked up and there was a Caterham Super 7 from England, a little sports car that looks like those there in the corner. And he said, I looked at that. And then he stopped me. There was this amazing bloke-to-bloke kind of moment. He said, Peter, or whatever your name is, because we really only just met, you need to understand that your life changes in a moment. It changes in an instant. Yeah. This is Carlos Castanaga's cubic centimetres of pure chance or not that can change your life. And so he said, I looked at that car and I knew I could build it. And he said his dad came up beside him and had a chat, and he said, hey Neil, you could build that thing. And this was it. This was the moment. So he went straight back to his factory, closed down his trailer making assembly line and started making the first Caterham 7, and sold 5 in the first few months off the one chassis he put on a motor show exhibition in 1988, and I think they've built 360 of them now, and they're $50,000 or $60,000 a pop. So that's just loved his work. Sarah went off and did all sorts of things, and she got very unwell. She said, life had been calling to me for a long time, but I just wasn't listening. And she said she was at home, she was very unhappy. A friend came around and said, Sarah, you've got to stop this. I've got somebody for you to go and see. So she went to see this person, a counsellor. And she said she walked up the drive. The counsellor was playing Eric Clapton quite loudly. She remembered that. She went inside. The woman turned off the stereo. She sat down opposite the counsellor, and she knew that this was her work. She started training in psychodrama. She said, in those first trainings, for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd come home. See, this is Beckner. The calling for you, the vocation for you, is at the place in which your own deep gladness and the world's hunger meet. Whoever you are, Mary Oliver goes on in that poem, whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls you like the wild geese, hush and exciting, over and over and over again, announcing your place in the family of things. So what do we have to do to find and sustain our life's work? We've got to let the soft animal of our body love what it loves. And we have to pay an exquisite attention to emergence, to the future that wants to emerge within our lives, with the invitations that are sitting with us, that begin with the shared enterprise, and then, as Bilbo Baggins says, you never know what's going to happen when you take a step out the door, where the adventure might take you. And we want our work to be an adventure. We want it to have that sense of meaning and place all the time. So let's finish with some questions for you. What do you need to maintain a personal sense of passion and fulfilment in your role? What do you yearn for? Where's the discomfort? Where's the thing that you're missing that you might use as a sort of guide, as a way of seeking something else? What's the next step? Where are the invitations in your life, like right now? If you take a breath and think and ponder, where are the invitations right in this moment, both in your life and in your work? And what are the opportunities for you to increase the contribution that you make? Are you and your team, or is there some new thing for you? Where are the invitations that are sitting in your life and in your work? if you're to follow these invitations, what we have to let go of. Life strategy, work strategy is deliberate, intentional, conscious imbalance in which you willfully sacrifice some things so you can do others. Millikan, a good friend of mine I've worked with for years, he said if you're really leading effectively, you're really going to annoy some people. So who are you going to annoy? Many of you have been annoying yourself for some time. How would it be if somebody else joined the party? Who might you say no to? What might you say yes to in your life situation? And who might help you? And finally, if you did all this, what's your highest future self? Where might you be like 10 years from now? Imagine if your highest future self came into the room. Where suddenly you realise, no, I need to make some shifts. You built your garden shed, you improved your nutrition, you started exercising, you went to work, you kind of found yourself more fully expressive and present, and you kind of brought forth that passion and energy, and there were some changes. And then you started to respond to invitations, you started to kind of shift the direction of your life and work. And you did that courageously, relentlessly, maybe for 10, 15 years. Who might you be? Where might you be? Imagine if that self came in and had a conversation with you, took you for a walk. I wonder what they'd say to you. I wonder what advice they might have for you right now about how you might go forward, what you might do with your life and work. So let's have a poem, then we'll have a stand and stretch, and we can think about those questions over lunch, I think. So here's the great paradox of leadership. It all begins with a meeting of ourselves. It begins by meeting our own images, our own hopes and yearnings and possibility, and then using the warm-up from that to orientate into life in a way that virtually nobody, and certainly most organisations, don't do, waiting upon the future that wants to emerge. The time will come, the poem goes, the time will come when you'll greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror. And each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit, eat, give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the one who has loved you all of your life, whom you ignored for another. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, sit, feast on your life. That's it. We just have a reflective period of coming back to our own best selves, the soft animal of our own body, our own being, and then we listen deeply to the invitations that rise up in ourselves and to those that come to us from the world external to us. With that sort of attention, our lives can change dramatically and beneficially for the good of ourselves and for others. So let's leave it at that. Thank you for your attention. I'll just let you sit with those questions, maybe have a ponder over lunch, and we'll take up a conversation with Margaret a little bit after lunch. So thank you.